Good evening. I'm Carol Olson Day of the New York Times. Welcome to the 11th Annual Arts and Leisure Weekend. We are so pleased tonight to have as our guest a rock and roll icon who has maintained his own unique identity over more than 2 decades as a multi-Grammy Award-winning musician and acclaimed singer, songwriter, and lyricist. His latest work, Songbook, is an entirely acoustic album of songs spanning his career, demanded by his fans. He also wrote and performed the song The Keeper for the film Machine Gun Preacher. And the exciting news is that it's a Golden Globe nominee and on the short list for songs in contention for an Oscar next month. You'll hear much more about this singular talent from our moderator. In the 23 years that he has been chief pop music critic for the Times and an editor of the Rolling Stone Encyclopedia of Rock and Roll, he has interviewed Nirvana in the Seattle Space Needle, watched U2 record an album in Dublin, spent an evening at Radiohead's favorite pub, interviewed everyone from Bono to Annie Lennox to Mary J. Blige for TimesTalks, and he has been personally denounced from the stage of Madison Square Garden by Axl Rose. Twice. So please join me in welcoming John Perellis and our very special guest, Chris Cornell.
Hello, everybody. This looks like a fun crowd. This definitely looks like a fun crowd. I'm really happy to be here with Chris Cornell. Let's talk about The Keeper.
Let's talk about it.
Well, it's in the movie Machine Gun Preacher, and it seems like you encapsulated the whole movie in 5 minutes.
Well, the way that it ended up, it's the music that is behind the credits, but it's also behind photos of Sam Childers, who that's what the story is about, and also the orphans in the Sudan that he built an orphanage for. And I think he has a few orphanages now. And it's kind of showing who the real people are: him, his wife, his daughter, the orphans, the people that work with him. There's a little short interview piece of him as well, and it kind of sums up the whole movie. The song itself, to me, was a perspective where I can't say I've had these experiences. I'm not him. I'm not a Sudanese child who's had its family kidnapped or murdered. I haven't been mistreated in that way. I don't live with that kind of fear. So other than sympathetically, how could I write the song? And the song came from the perspective of, if Sam Childers, for example, were a songwriter, what would he write and what would he sing to these kids? And that's where the idea for The Keeper came from. And it just ended up that the song they decided to put there with the real images and the real people, which wasn't planned on, but I was happy with that.
Huh. Did you watch the movie 5 times and meet Childers and I mean, how deep did you have to research?
Well, it started with the script, and they hadn't started filming yet. So my friend Michael Cooper, who was the one that got me in touch with Mark Forster, it was his idea that maybe I would write a song or songs for this film, and it would be great for this subject, because he had read the script. So I read the script, loved it, was really intrigued by the story, the scope of the story, because it's about a Pennsylvania biker, meth head criminal who then finds sobriety, becomes born again, builds a church, and then becomes the pastor of that church because he can't find anyone else to do it. And then ends up on just kind of a missionary trip, goes to the Sudan and decides that he wants to go out into the real areas where some of this violence happens. And while he's there, a something bad does happen, and that he's in the middle of a horrific experience, and that sort of changes something, throws a switch in his mind, and he starts to dedicate his life to protecting these kids, which means essentially going out and shooting people and killing people and getting shot at, and so the scope of it was enormous, and to write one 3-minute song for that is almost impossible, I thought. But to me, it was an interesting thing to get into. I spoke to Mark Forster, the director, the day I think that he started shooting, and he gave me two bits of direction. One was don't make this too literal, and the other one was if you want, go on Sam Childers' website, Angels of East Africa, which is the organization that runs these orphanages and is the charity. And so I did that, and there was a photo gallery on that, and some YouTube links of Sam actually walking people through some of the villages or through the orphanage, and he has this amazing direct matter-of-fact way of just saying this is the situation that they live in, and this is what they're going to have to do today, whether it's walking several miles to get clean water, or essentially drinking and preparing food with poisoned water, or eating dirt, or whatever it is. And those were the visuals that I had for writing the song, because the movie hadn't been filmed yet.
Right. So you were looking at the real thing.
Yeah, and then I think the film, even to this day, is challenging for people in that this is based on a real person's life, and because it's based on a real person's life, you can't really direct his life or him as a character into a convenient package, and it's certainly not that. It's someone who's a biker drug addict that's synonymous with right wing and racist groups, and yet he becomes a born-again Christian and wants to build a church for people that some Christian churches won't take, so it's non-denominational. And then he becomes a humanitarian that's in Africa, risking his life to rescue African children, but he also seems to enjoy being in this situation where he may be able to shoot at somebody that deserves it, and then he doesn't have to feel bad. So, I think it's a difficult story necessarily for people to understand. Do I like this guy? Do I not like this guy? Do I believe in this? Do I not? No one's going to argue with children needing help. The LRA, which is the terrorist group that goes after these children, is also a Christian group, and
it's complicated.
Yeah, it's complicated. And for those different reasons, not a lot of people have seen it and know necessarily about the story. So, I hope that the song, ultimately, my goal is that in the long run, the song will help do some of that job of just getting the story out there, and maybe directing some people toward the film to see it.
Was it hard to write? I mean, did you go through multiple drafts, or did it just come to you? Or
I had different ideas, and which has happened before for films. If I'm writing songs for an album of mine, or even if it's something that's a collaboration with a bandmate, it's different because it's about us or it's about me, and anything that comes up is valid. When it's someone else's story, you have to be a little more careful and focused. So I had a few ideas that they were completely different ideas, and I think could have worked in the film, but the keeper kind of was the home run, and it was probably the third thing that I had come up with.
So there's a lot on the cutting room floor.
Yeah, I don't know if I think of it as on the floor. If I finish a song, I think it should sort of, to quote my friend Tom Morello, it should have its day in court. So there are very few songs that I'll get to the point where I would play it for someone to hear, and it won't come out in some form, some way.
Yeah. Huh. So once they're finished,
I'll find a place for it. Yeah.
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 It's. Should we play a little of it? Have you guys heard it? You want to pull? But I mean, film is different for you. I mean, you've mostly written with bands and on your own.
Yeah, it's different. There's kind of there's the film itself, which you're collaborating with, in a sense. And no matter what anyone says, whether it's a director, actor, writer, producer, they don't really have control over what that feeling is, not to the degree that you might have if you're painting a picture, where it's your arm and your just sense of what it is you want to do. There's so many components to a film and so many people involved. It can be staggering. So you have that, whatever that it is, you're collaborating with that. And then, to me, kind of in the middle of that is the collaborating with the director and their vision of it. And then that's the next step. Maybe behind that it's the producer, but that tends to be, the director and the producer might have their own ideas and their own arguments about it. But that's definitely different than any other collaboration.
Yeah.
And including the story is a big part of it as a lyricist. There's what is the sense and the feeling and the mood and the textures musically, and then lyrically, how do I describe it? Because it's not my story. It's not about me.
Wouldn't that be liberating though, in a way? Because you've written umpty thousand songs about you.
It can be. It's not as easy in the sense that I think every time it's sort of relearning the process in a sense.
Yeah.
But it's probably helpful in even me writing songs about me, just because it's opening up different windows and doors into different ideas and stories and feelings musically, and learning how to be comfortable telling those stories. And when I was just touring here in the U.S., I actually spent a lot of time in the Northeast doing my acoustic show, the kind of one-man show, and I only played The Keeper a couple of times and at a couple different shows, and when I did, I noticed that it really felt like it was someone else's song almost, like the way that the feeling that kind of came over the room and how it fit into the rest of the repertoire, it definitely stood out on its own as being something completely different. And it has to be that I really tried to dive into something with a completely different approach creatively, because I felt that it was necessary. And that's different than, for example, it's 1990 and you get a call and it's someone saying, is Soundgarden there? Yes, we're here. We want you to write a song for our film, and we want you to just do what you do, because that's what we want. And then you get that feeling, oh, okay, so we just do what we already do. And
Which one?
That's happened a lot. That's happened since since the 80s, where whoever's producing a film or directing a film would come after us specifically because they like what we do already and they think that fits. And that's happened numerous times. But something that's different about maybe a story like The Keeper is that you have just sort of a sense of responsibility to the story. When I wrote a Bond theme for Casino Royale, I didn't feel necessarily that sense of responsibility. I felt like I wanted it to coexist with the movie. I wanted it to be fun. It was my chance, I felt, almost to like write a song if I were a crooner and create a part for me to play, and then I would act in it.
This is You Know My Name.
You Know My Name, yeah, but it was fun.
Well, also, didn't you have David Arnold's tune?
I collaborated with David Arnold, and I had never met him before, so that was exciting because it's a little scary to sit down with someone you don't have any idea who they are. You're not in a band with them. You don't know them, and to just decide that you're going to trust them. And so that was a great experience, and he was great to work with, and a great guy. And we produced it together and played it together. We played all the instruments except for the drums, I think. And
you were a drummer.
But it's a Bond theme. It's supposed to be fun, and almost even to some degree it can be funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the song is all about I'm a spy. This is
Kind
what I
of,
do.
yeah. I mean, in this, I got lucky because Casino Royale is the first book Ian Fleming wrote where the character James Bond appears, and he's not yet this unfeeling, unflinching super spy. He's still a person, and he falls in love, and he gets betrayed, and he still has emotions, and so that actually made it really easy to write, because the title made it very difficult. If you called and said we got a movie, it's called Thunderball, write the song. We go, great, that's easy.
Yeah, it rhymes with everything.
Thunderball, and just write the title first,
Right.
and then Casino Royale. They had to come up with something else.
No, that's famously the only James Bond theme without the title in it?
Until,
Oh, is there another one now?
well, I think Quantum of Solace probably wasn't called that. Maybe it was. I don't know. I didn't follow it.
But well, you're not tracking statistics on this.
No, I didn't really care what happened after me.
But I mean, you talked about diving deep into a character, and your songs dive really deep, scary places. I'm thinking about something like "Slaves and Bulldozers." I mean, do those come like a thunderclap? Do those?
When everything's working the way I think it should, yeah.
Because the person in that song is not a happy fella.
No, and I think that there's something that happens when I sort of let my guard down and allow that, whoever that person is, that character, and I don't know who that is. It's maybe it's the disappointed version of me as a child. I don't know. Maybe it's the observer that sees things that as what you imagine the world is gets replaced by different glimpses into reality, which is often awful. It's probably that startled, scared kid that is reacting, in an aggressive way and a descriptive way out of defense, I suppose.
Yeah.
But then there are little things, there are little bits and pieces of inspiration and imagination that come from that. The title "Slaves and Bulldozers" came from Kim, whose friend worked at a Native American arts center and school, and there was a child that was going there who had fetal alcohol syndrome, and he had some different eccentricities from that, and one of them was his focus on words and descriptions, and he had told Kim's friend that he was playing a game in the playground called "Slaves and Bulldozers," and I think he was probably 6 years old. And that's where that title came from. But I was imagining, in a sense, like, what was that game? And that also became part of the, my image of the music. And then all of that fit inside of mine and ours, collectively, our sort of image of Soundgarden as a band. And what kind of music does that band play? And what do we sound like? There's layers to it.
Yeah.
And then you have to let go of all of those layers, of course, when you're sitting down to write something.
Huh. I wanted to ask you because, I mean, Soundgarden was, before grunge had a name, there you were. I mean, even Ultra Mega OK sounds like you know what you want to sound like. I mean, there's not a lot of like warming up in your catalog. It's like you were pretty formed at the beginning.
We have, I guess, 15 songs that I look at as sort of the warming up, which were never released. It was the first 15 we wrote. It was on a cassette that Kim always referred to as the first 15. And I suppose once we started recording, we were a band for a couple of years before we really did much of it. And as we started recording, it was us saving up money from our day jobs, and we would spend time recording. And when we would go in to record, we tended to record the newest things we had written because it was what we were the most excited about.
Right.
And
but was there a feeling we want to sound like this? This is who we are. Was there?
I think we
like
had that
this?
feeling as it was happening.
Yeah.
We certainly didn't sit down and say we want to leave these ingredients out and we want to have these ingredients in. We just got together in a room and started writing songs and did it very quickly. And then we would sit around and we would discuss what that sounds like. And then over time, I think we would maybe be critical of some of the things that we were writing and playing and excited about some of the new stuff we were bringing into the band. And Soundgarden was very Beatlesque in terms of everybody's contributions. I actually started getting serious about playing guitar and bass and after Soundgarden was formed, so I could contribute music, and it was always well received. And in all incarnations, everybody contributed musically and sometimes lyrically, and it just so it's sort of almost like if you look at an octopus where there's different arms kind of grabbing different influences from different places all at the same time and bringing them into head that is the center, and that was us as a band. And I think with most bands where everyone has a creative say, your sound becomes kind of, it becomes what you've all agreed on as influences that you like. Because everyone has influences that their bandmates are going to hate, and they don't want to know about it, and they don't want it inside their band. But they're going to like other things that you like, and you're going to share ideas and share different influences, and maybe turn your bandmates on to music they haven't heard. And we had all that. So,
was there any time you'd say, "Well, Kim likes that, I'll put up with it," or was it battle to the death?
Not so much in terms of direct influences. I think there were moments where it was songs that we had written, and particularly when it would come to recording, and then when we were recording for an album, for an LP, and then everybody had different ideas as to what should eventually end up on it. Super Unknown and Down on the Upside they're both as long as you could possibly have to put on a compact disc sonically, because we didn't agree on what should be cut. We all had different favorites and different ideas as to what the best songs were, what the second best songs were, that kind of thing.
Yeah, they do run long now.
Yeah, but that's normal, I think, and I think we ended up making these epic albums in a sense kind of because of that, because we had different attitudes and different ideas. But overall, I think we always agreed on influences. Or we might have different ideas about, for a band like the Beatles, for example, might have different attitudes about them, about what they mean, about what their place in history is or will be, but that doesn't mean that we wouldn't all appreciate it. Matt Cameron was a big influence in Soundgarden's music, and his approach, songwriting, is initially we started out as a three-piece, and when he joined the band, he also brought in, he had a lot of song ideas, he was multi-instrumental, and it was very different than anything we'd ever done. And then when Ben Shepherd joined, we had about a year and a half or so lapse of that kind of just creative influence that Hiro Yamamoto had initially started out with. He just kind of withdrew his creative input. And when Ben joined the band, he was like a huge creative force, but it was also different. And yet somehow we seemed whole when another creative force was back in a fully creative mode. So we were always finding ourselves, and I always felt like that was a good thing. I didn't feel like we made a defining album at some point in our history, which meant that now we have to go out and just kind of just live up to that. We never really did that. I think we were always reaching, and in doing so, I feel like we've always been vital, even up to now, writing music now.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about Rusty Cage, because that's such the beginning of it is so whacked out. That's the technical term. But I mean, did you write that? Did you bring the song in and some crazy thing happened in the studio? That riff is just so nuts.
Yeah, that was written as that. And that was, I think, me kind of having this concept of, musically anyway, mixing this kind of up-tempo, almost hillbilly rock with Black Sabbath. I was imagining like Hillbilly Sabbath. What would Hillbilly Sabbath sound like? Because it was just something that crossed my mind, and a band like the Meat Puppets was a big influence on Soundgarden. We were huge fans, and I was a huge fan of the songwriting and the guitar playing. But Soundgarden had this heavier, kind of constant, I guess you'd sort of call it axles, like these huge heavy axles with big wheels on them, and anything you put on top of that was still going to be on top of this big heavy axle with big huge wheels, and so how does an influence like Chris and Kirkwood enter into our band? Because I wanted it to, and that song was kind of that. And lyrically, it was images that were written completely separate when we were on the road in Europe, and I was just looking out of a van window and bored and just kind of coming up with that, those lyrical ideas and feeling kind of, in a sense, encaged and looking out into a big world I'd never seen before, which at the time was probably Germany. I think we spent a lot of time in Germany, in weeks and weeks touring, you know, and it was always rainy and dismal and big black clouds and ominous. And
Were you surprised when Johnny Cash did it?
I actually didn't think it was a good idea. I was asked to do an arrangement for Johnny Cash of that song, and I didn't hear it, and so I declined to do it, and then Rick Rubin put it on the next album, not the one that he had initially asked for the arrangement for, and then when I heard it, it made perfect sense. I just thought, oh, it sounds like Johnny Cash. It was just a Tennessee 3 shuffle with you know, the couple of the right chosen chords and Johnny Cash singing the lyrics over it, and it made perfect sense, and the mood was great, and you know, it was a huge moment for me, I suppose, as having a fan moment, and just feeling like, you know, that in some way it's an accomplishment that I never would have dreamed of from being a little kid. My brother brought home Live at San Quentin when I was probably 8 or 9. You know, we listened to it, and Johnny Cash was always larger than life. And I met him after he did that song. Ben and I stood and talked to him, and he literally was larger than life, you know, and as he spoke, the floor would kind of rumble a little bit. And so it was a really exciting thing. And I remember seeing the Martin Scorsese, Bob Dylan documentary, where Dylan's being interviewed about Johnny Cash doing one of his songs, and whatever it was, the little words came out of his mouth talking about it. I had the same feeling all these years later, only I'm not Bob Dylan. I'm just me, and it just seemed unlikely. So, you know, I'm thankful to Rick Rubin for that, you know, having that vision, because I certainly did not agree with that as any kind of a brilliant vision at all.
Maybe he heard the hillbilly in it.
I guess so. I don't know. I mean, he had a talent for that. He put together Run DMC with Aerosmith, which was pretty brilliant. He was very instrumental in Audioslave coming together. He's good at kind of seeing those angles and those possibilities, I guess.
Was he the real catalyst for Audioslave happening?
Apparently, yeah. Apparently, it was a conversation he had with Tom and Brad and Timmy, who weren't sure what they wanted to do, and I think he was initially the one that encouraged them to contact me. So I would say that's a catalyst.
Yeah, but I mean,
and also he was having trust in his judgment was part of me thinking maybe it would be a good idea for us to get into a room. Once we got into a room, we clicked so quickly. It was we didn't need encouragement. I didn't need encouragement after that. I felt 100% confident.
Well, it's strange because you built up a whole chemistry with Soundgarden. You torpedoed the whole chemistry and disbanded the band. And then, you know, you walked into a band that was together already.
Well, I always envisioned Soundgarden as being intact. Like we sort of, if this were the band, we created it, and it was the sculpture, and it was as we wanted it to be, and then we walked away before anybody did anything stupid to it. And you know, so to me, it was like it was the perfect ending in a sense. The idea that it could continue, I don't think we really even wanted to worry about that.
But you still got along?
I'm sorry?
You still got along with them?
Absolutely, yeah. We always got along, and still do. We didn't have that that kind of dynamic where there was constant hatred underlying, kind of infighting, and a lot of that came up in articles about us where it was really just fictitious, and I felt like writers were sort of following the script given to them by stories they'd heard about Roger Daltrey and Pete Townsend or Led Zeppelin or whatever it was, and we were like any band. We had tension, but it was always much more complicated than that. And we're also, I think, for the most part, reasonable people. If anything, if we had any real trouble, it was that being 4 reasonable people in a hard rock band isn't that easy to do. Because part of being reasonable is you have to stop and sort of look at yourselves and go, this is what we do and this is us, and how do we fit into the rest of the world, and does that mean we're like the rest of the world, and all of these things. So I felt like that was intact. I felt like Audioslave to me was, in a sense, an opportunity like Temple of the Dog was, which Temple of the Dog taught me that I could write songs and exist in an environment creatively with people other than Soundgarden, who I knew was special, and do something that was entirely different, that could also be special on its own in a completely different way, and have its own life. And when that project ended, when Temple of the Dog was finished and the record came out, obviously we didn't tour, we went back to our prospective projects. Soundgarden was writing Bad Motorfinger, and Pearl Jam became Pearl Jam and did 10. And I just had in the back of my mind that that was an amazing experience, and the voice saying, don't be closed to collaborations like that in the future, because you never know, it might be something else like this. And so when I got a message from Tom Morello about getting together and possibly playing music together and see if that leads to something, who knows what, that voice was still there. I'd had a lot of offers to do a lot of different things with different artists, and even like European DJs and super famous guitar players, and none of it seemed like a good idea. But that, to me, I just did the quick math in my head, imagining what that could sound like.
So you knew Rage.
Yeah, Soundgarden had played shows with them,
Yeah.
and they were like one of the best live bands I'd ever seen in my life. So I felt like something good could come from that, and I suppose I had some image of what that might sound like, which isn't what we ended up sounding
No, it didn't
at all.
sound like that at
But
all.
I didn't care. We allowed ourselves to have our own life. We didn't worry about that. But it was that experience that I had with the other members of Temple of the Dog and that album that made me feel that something like getting together with the other guys in Audioslave could be a good thing, and it turned out to be a great thing for me. I mean, it was almost like the perfect thing, the right thing at the right time. Physically, mentally, in terms of my life and relationships and my mindset and alcohol, substance abuse was all kind of coming to a head right then. And I don't think I would have been capable of really making it through that in the way that I did without having something else to focus on, without having 3 other strong personalities there. And there's a distraction in a sense. There was also a catharsis, which the lyrics on the first Audioslave album really present that. It's there.
Yeah.
And
Everything you say is what you mean.
yeah, and then getting into taking that music out and touring and going on the road was it was sort of the new beginning for me.
Well, I always think the road is...
split up from a marriage. I'd quit alcohol, I quit drugs, I'd quit everything. I'd left every one that I'd known, relationships that I'd had that were destructive behind. And suddenly I'm in this new band and we're traveling the world playing music. It was a strange, but really sort of luckily timed thing.
Huh. I always think the road is a place where you can slip.
Yeah, people used to say that to me. To me, it's a place where you have something to focus on.
You better make it to the gig and not be...
Well, it's exciting. I'm always trying to get better at what I do or find new, sort of new life to a song or a body of work. And in this case, we were actually trying to figure out who we were. Mm-hmm. That was my biggest obstacle in Audioslave, was trying to figure out who are we? When we're on stage, what are we? Because we're coming from 2 very specific bands that have very intense and very specific identities. But yeah, I didn't. We were on tour for a year, I think, after that, and I had no issues at all because I had that focus.
Huh. So good therapy.
Yeah, it was great. I think it really was.
Soundgarden's back. I mean, was that like a series of phone calls? How did that happen?
It initially was some phone calls, and you can clap.
I'm happy about it too.
There may have been some emails too by then.
But I mean, who started it?
Well, we all started having the conversation about the legacy factor, and for me, it started. My wife Vicki and I were in a clothing store looking for baby clothes, and I saw Ramones shirts, and feeling very happy about that. That's great. There's a Ramones shirt in here, and then babies are wearing Ramones shirts, and you would see AC/DC shirts, and that started to get me thinking. There's no Soundgarden shirt, and then seeing fans online talking about there's no website, there's no fan club, there's no place to go buy Soundgarden T-shirts if you want one. There's none of that, and management, record company. Nobody had been servicing that or paying any attention to it whatsoever. And I think we all kind of, at the same time, realized that we had become a classic band and thought of as a classic band whose music wasn't sort of stuck in a time capsule, but was living on. And we needed to service that legacy. We needed to get together, and it was our responsibility to make sure that new generations hear our music and this body of work that we did, and know what the band Soundgarden was. And that's what got us in a room talking. So the initial business was starting a website, starting the fan club up again, starting a line of merchandise, T-shirts, and whatever else it might be. Re-releases, B-sides, whatever that might be. And once we started doing that, once we actually got in a room, where we're sitting literally like you and I are sitting, there was about 4 or 5 minutes of uncomfortableness, and then we were just telling stories and laughing, and then the band dynamic was living. And once you see that living and breathing like its own sort of organic being, anything was possible after that, and everything, and also probable. I think. I think we'd all missed each other. I think we'd all missed working together creatively, and it all just sort of came about naturally after that.
Well, you'd been playing the songs with your band, some of them.
I've been playing. I stuck to songs that I had written both the music and lyrics for, but I had played some.
But I mean, did muscle memory come back when you started rehearsing? And
I think, for example, playing anything with different people sort of pointed to the reality that it's very different. If I sit and do an acoustic version of a Soundgarden song, it's supposed to be different. It's
right.
just a guitar. If it's a group of people in a room and it's the same number of instruments, but it's not the same people, it's not the same thing, but in a way that I didn't necessarily like. The first time we got back into a room and started playing, within seconds, everything comes back. It's almost like music as a time machine, where I remember the dynamic between everyone, and also most notably, this sort of indescribable element that is it's some type of a chaos that happens when we play any song together, and we can't control it, and it shows up in different amounts depending on the day and the place. And it's just this kind of swirling, chaotic, other life that happens when we play together. And I'd kind of forgotten that existed. Once we were doing it, and we were in a room playing, and it appeared, this thing, and I suppose it's mostly sonic, and then that triggers some emotional response in all of us, and then it becomes emotional or whatever it is. Then I remembered that, yeah, I had actually done a lot of thinking on that before. And there were times when I'd thought about that because it was terrifying when there was too much of it on stage in front of a lot of people, and it was also even more terrifying when we would occasionally walk out on stage and it wasn't there at all. Somehow now, it's always there, but it seems to be there in a slightly more manageable way. But just I say slightly because it's still it's something that gets away from us. It's an unpredictable thing, and I think that's part of the magic that we always had, that we all recognized but didn't know how to describe it.
Yeah.
But we allow for it to exist. We steer into it sometimes. I always thought of Soundgarden as being this band on stage that we all had our different degrees of putting up with being on the road or playing for long periods of time, and we would all sort of snap at different times as to when we would come, each of us individually come unglued musically and just start kind of going off the map. But we were really good at allowing each other to do that, or like wandering off with the other person. And I think we're probably as good or better at that now than we've ever been. There doesn't seem to be any reluctance from anyone now to do that if we want. The only thing, I suppose there's a need to kind of play the songs that we know people have liked now for all these years to them while they're there, as opposed to wandering off in something that might seem self-indulgent. But that's just, I think that's also a struggle that any live band will have.
Yeah. But I saw the gig in Newark, and the band was like a fist, like a clenched fist. I mean, you were so together, so tightly wound.
Oh, thank God for that.
But it kept striking me how like complicated and odd those songs are.
Yeah, the playing and singing them is, I had to work at it again. I had to not relearn them, but allow for muscle memory, where I think we all had to do that, where we had to just kind of let go of the wheel and play the songs, just count them in, and let muscle memory take over, because some of it is just like too many layers and too complicated to actually sit and relearn intellectually, which we tried to do a couple times. And we like the song Loud Love is an example, has a lot of different little events in it, and we didn't remember any of them. And we went and put the song on. The song starts, and as soon as it starts, we're all talking about other stuff and ignoring it. We're not even listening. And so then we stopped and started the song again to sit and listen, and we ignored it. And so I guess we just sort of decided collectively to, let's not do it that way, let's just try to play the song, and then let it not work. And then as we played, we discovered that muscle memory was the best way to do it. Someone would go, oh, wait a minute, oh, or you just start playing it.
So it came back?
Yeah, it all came back better that way than to sit and take apart the different segments of the song. There's always a lot of layering. Kim and I, as two different guitar players, we would just sort of choose our battles. Like, I would often play the part that was the easiest to play and sing, and then he would play the other parts. Or, and we had to remember a lot of that. And there's a lot of, I think you did this and I did that, and then I might be wrong. I did that and you did this, and then we'd realize neither of us did either of those things. Remember, we did this other thing. But that's an interesting part too about Soundgarden, is that the live version and the studio version don't have to have anything to do with each other, really, and we never felt like they did.
Yeah, they definitely come back. Are you? There's supposedly a new album. Are there songs written? Where is that at?
Yeah, there's a lot of songs written. I think we're already at the number where we'll have trouble agreeing on what should be.
Oh, good. The old problem is back.
Yeah, I can see that happening for sure. So yeah, it's hard to say how done we are, because ideas come in under the wire. But if we had to be done tomorrow, we could probably be done.
Wow, so it's that close. Does it feel like Soundgarden? I mean, because bands have a collective identity beyond the individuals.
It feels like that. there are multiple relationships as well within the 4 members of the band, where we're collaborating with each other in different combinations, and they're very specific, and it's
Well, like what?
been really exciting. Well, for example, if Matt brings in a song idea, he's very unique in the way that he approaches music, extremely. And even though it may have been 14 years or 15 years, my immediate creative response was recognizable as, oh, this is where I go when I'm coming up with an idea over a piece of Matt's music. And how interesting is it that I haven't written anything that reminds me of this in any way in the last 15 years. And it's also very specific to what would I do over something that's Kim's idea or Ben's idea. And then also Ben sometimes will bring in vocal melodies or lyrics or complete song, and how do I sing that? Because I don't do that very often, where I'm singing someone else's lyrics.
Right.
But with his, I've always been able to do it unself-consciously, and my only concern was, is it authentic, And so all those relationships were still and are still completely intact, almost as though they were put on ice or cryogenically frozen and then reemerge. And we all have a little more experience in songwriting, I suppose, and recording and things like that. And that, I think that's informed what we're doing now a little bit. We've included more musical references because more has happened musically, and that gets in there a little bit. But I guess because we don't have a definitive song or a definitive album or any style that I could point at that says this specifically is who we are or who we were, it makes it easier for us to be just who and what we are now. And I feel like the music that we're writing is very much Soundgarden. It's very different than the last music we wrote, but that was different than the previous body of work. And so to me, it's a very organic, natural step.
Well, are you thinking
Feels
about,
like we had 5 years off as opposed to 3 times that much.
are you thinking about how they're going to sound live? I mean, are you thinking about that sort of massive impact that it has live?
Yeah, that's usually something we worry about after the album is released, but it's great in thinking that while we're out there now doing shows because we're playing, everything is kind of old material now, but we have a huge body of work, and we've only been playing older songs because so many people haven't had a chance to hear them live in so long. So it's really exciting to think about adding this new feel to the set, and this song will do this, and it can appear at this time with this old song, and this other song, which is a completely different feeling, will broaden out the live show, and it will be exciting, and it'll be sort of unpredictable as well, because new songs take on their own life in Soundgarden a lot. We really don't know what they'll sound like until we're out there doing it.
Well, you said the live's always different from the studio.
Yeah. For us, it always is. We find out what that good live version is while we're rehearsing it, and then the first 10 shows,
Right.
it finds itself
You're still rehearsing it.
in front of people. Well, I still think of our whole catalog as changing as we play now. I'm approaching some of the songs differently than I did before.
Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, they are 14, 13, 15 more
20.
years old, 20 years old.
Some of them
Do you look back at them and think, wow, that's what I was talking about? Or, who was I then?
I think that there's that time capsule moment where I remember me and what I was thinking, at least when I'm writing lyrics.
Do you have to be that person again when you sing
I think
them?
it happens naturally.
Huh.
And it might be, there's different facets to my character now, and they seem to coexist fine, with that other person. And maybe there's some new components emotionally that I can pull out of the ether that add to it, that make it better. To me, it feels a little fuller. I guess fuller, I don't mean sonically. I just mean maybe sort of emotionally, and somewhere that translates to the performance. In terms of arrangements, as we were going through old songs, I was actually really surprised that I was feeling like we made so many good decisions 20 years ago. And I'm very proud of that. The only thing I'm embarrassed by, I suppose, is some of my singing. And I think, there's just different approaches, kind of more of an aggressive, bratty approach to some of it, like I've got a chip on my shoulder, I got something to prove, and I don't have that feeling now. But I also don't like the way it sounds. I don't like the way that attitude sounds on tape. I don't feel that way
sound
about
like
the
Big
music.
Dumb Sex? Well, I mean, what do you mean?
Well, no, 'cause that was actually, that was in a sense the sentiment that went over everyone's head at the time. It was almost like we're too smart to even make fun of this. Everyone thinks it's true, like we mean it, and some people still do. But I guess some of the more aggressive songs had this kind of attitude of wanting to push that sentiment sort of out of the speakers and over the top to make sure that it was got. Mm-hmm. And I guess that at some point I as a songwriter and a person that produces records, and I think I at some point discovered that it's actually more effective. You'll achieve that more effectively if you don't do that.
Understatement works sometimes.
If it's subtle,
yeah.
If it's understated and it comes out in a different way, there's an easier way to do it. And also there's a range factor where there was a point, I think, in the late 80s and early 90s where my vocal range didn't really seem to have a ceiling. It just kind of kept going up. And so I kept writing melodies in registers that went higher and higher up. And then I had to go kind of out of my way to stop doing that because it started to sound silly to me. And
Mariah Carey's waiting.
that sometimes does sound silly to me now. Like I don't know why I did that. Having said that, we still perform Beyond the Wheel, which was on Ultra Mega OK, and that's somewhere near the highest I ever sang, and that doesn't feel strange to me.
So you still got the range.
I can still do it, yeah. It doesn't feel like it was a bad idea, but there were some songs in there where I think it was unnecessary for me to write in that register. I used to never think about it. Someone would play the part, I would come up with a melody and whatever that key was, and that would be it. And if I had to, whatever that was, I just had to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Was there some? I mean, I've always wondered, how did you discover your? I mean, your voice is just like an astonishing, natural thing. Did you discover it? Did someone encourage you? Did you?
It was in the room in rehearsals with Soundgarden and songwriting, really.
Really?
Where we were always very loud, still are, and that probably had a lot to do with it. In that there's less of a self-conscious nature when there's so much volume that even if you're screaming through a PA and it's loud, it's still barely audible. And that got me to the point where I had to really push to get over the top volume-wise to be able to hear anything I was doing, or to be able to have an impact at all as a singer and a lyricist within the context of the song. And since the first few years of Soundgarden's life were all live on a stage in a club somewhere, it just kind of happened then.
So you just pushed higher and harder, and
yeah. And there was a song that Hiro Yamamoto wrote the lyrics for called "Heretic," and the initial demo, he's screaming the line "Heretic," and it's just this high-pitched screamy yell. And somewhere along the line we decided that I would sing it, and so I was screaming it similarly. And then one day we went into rehearsals and I was screaming it, and suddenly there were sort of notes up there. So I made decisions and decided, okay, now this isn't just atonal white noise. There's a melody and there's notes here, and I'm singing these notes. And then another day I would walk in and I'd go to sing those notes and they weren't there. I'm like, okay, so I'm definitely like pushing it a little past whatever my range is.
Into the red zone.
Into the red zone where I can't rely on it. So that's not good. And then suddenly it would stretch out again and I would have those notes. And then it just kept going
Skyward.
northward, yeah.
But I actually wanted to ask you one other thing, though, because you've also recorded the acoustic album. Is that teaching you about your songs? Because you got to take them all apart again.
Well, it's such a completely different approach to performing, and it's a different musical approach that there are almost no songs that I've written in the context of a rock song that I can play the exact same way acoustically
Right.
and have it work.
No,
So
you have to think through them entirely. I think.
no, I mean, a song like Fell on Black Days is the closest thing, I think, to any acoustic song where if you play it and sing it exactly the same way on an acoustic guitar, it works. Either one is translatable, and I really don't change it any in terms of my approach. But most songs I do. Most songs require a lot of playing over and over and see how they feel. And find a good song in there, a good acoustic version of a song in there somewhere.
Yeah. Well, thank you all.
Thank you.